I get a fair few questions as to how I go about weathering my track, and now that I've got to the stage of having the ballast down on the upper section, it's now time for me to start weathering down the track and the ballast. What this video will do, it will take you through a step by step as to how I go about it. There's more than one way to go about doing this. You can hand paint it, there's even ballast and weathering pens you can use from Woodland Scenics, you know, to like a felt pen. And obviously the method I'm going to use is the airbrush. So hopefully they'll find this video useful. Any questions, get in touch. Cheers. First thing I do when I'm going to do any airbrushing is I prepare the layout. You'll notice I've taken away the retaining walls here. That's just for me to get easier access down to the track level when I'm doing the side of the tracks and the rails. What also I've done is I've put a dust sheet up at the back. You probably see on the back scene there. That's just stop any overspray. I don't want it getting it on to the photographic back scenes. The airbrush vapour, if you like, the paint doesn't travel particularly far, but it does tend to smell. So make sure you're working in a ventilated area, and I'll go through the equipment I use for that shortly. What I've also done is I've moved all the trains to the other end of the layout. I don't want any possibility whatsoever of getting any overspray or any speckles of anything on my locos. The price of things these days is so expensive, I don't want to ruin a pristine model with some spatters of sleeper grime. Another thing I do to the layout before I start to paint is I've got the Heathcote sensors, and you'll notice I put two blobs of blue tack there just over the sensors. I don't want to spray on them because then they'll not work. Okay, so that is what I do before I start to, you know, get the paint on the go. What I've got here is I've got the stuff that I need to paint the tracks and the rail sides. What I use is I use Rail Match enamels in sleeper grime. This is a great enamel, just in the right colour for weathering down and toning down the rail sides and the sleeper tops, and it's great for obviously toning down the ballast as well. I use the Enamel Thinners, and I've kind of got a 60-40 mix here of 60-40, 60% paint, 40% thinners. Mixed it up, and what I use to mix it up, I've got these Tamiya paint stirrers. You get two, you've got a wee spoon at one end and a flat blade if you like. It's a screwdriver in essence, but you get two in a pack. I picked them up for next to nothing at a show, and they're quite handy. Okay, and they save you ruining one of your screwdrivers. The paint's been stirred thoroughly. If you're using a large area, I would always mix a big load of it so that I'm just topping up the airbrush as I go, as opposed to mixing it in the actual cup. Alright, because you don't want to have to keep mixing and then stirring and stuff, and you want the consistency to be the same, so you don't have to change your pressures, etc. So mix a batch that should do you the entire area that you're trying to use. Once again, I've said it in my previous videos, a face mask, especially working at close quarters here with the track, don't breathe in enamel fumes, especially even the thinner smell. Okay, you'll give yourself a headache. So get a decent face mask, not one of the cheapy throwaway ones you get in B&Q home base. Okay, they are not for paint, they're just for dust. If you're decorating your house or you're sweeping out your garage or something, get a proper mask that's designed for painting. Rubber gloves, I don't go for the powdered ones, I go for the non-powdered ones because I want powder everywhere. So disposable gloves, keep your fingers nice and clean. I've just put down a kind of covering sheet here to keep any paint spills off the baseboard, and I've just tacked it in place. Okay, so that's really ready to go now. I'll fill the airbrush up, get my equipment on, and I'll show you how to go about it. This is a dual action airbrush, and the kind of big telltale difference in the appearance of it is the button and lever. On a single action, it's a case of push and off, push and off. This one, you have to push it down to get the air to flow, and then pull the lever back to adjust the amount of paint that comes out of the nozzle. Now, for example, here, I'm just pushing the button to allow air to flow, and you probably hear it. Okay, but there's no paint coming out. Whereas if I go, say here, and push the button in, and then pull the lever back quite a lot of paint comes out. If I push the button in, or the lever in, and draw it back a little, See, there's a small amount of paint comes out. Do it more paint comes out. Okay, so this allows me to adjust the flow of the paint out of the nozzle with more accuracy and, you know, control. So again, push the button down, nothing happens, just the air flows. Draw the lever back slightly, you'll see the paint starting to appear, and that's kind of setting that I can use it and hold my finger there. And if you obviously want more paint, you pull the lever back, you'll hear it, more paint comes out for obviously bigger areas if you're doing a big area of solid colour. This is good for the weathering because it allows you to kind of adjust the flow. Okay, I hope that clears up what a dual action or a double action airbrush is, as opposed to a single action, where you've just not quite got that element of control about the flow of the paint and air. Okay, what I've started to do here, as you can see, is I've started to weather the rail sides using the sleeper grime enamels. What I tend to do is give it 3 or 4 passes, leaving a wee bit of time in between to each rail side. Okay, that's not done in one coat. Being thinned down, the paint obviously won't be as thick as if you're just hand brushing it straight from the jar. So you've got to kind of give it more than one pass just to get rid of that nickel unrealistic finish to this side of the rail. Okay, it's very long-winded and boring, and I'll show you a very short section here of how I go about it. There are more than one way to do this. I've just kind of picked this up as my preferred technique. Okay, so on with the mask, and I'll get the airbrush. Now I've got the pressure set to about 15 psi. If your paint is thicker, you might have to up it a little bit. If you're wanting obviously more finesse, you just reduce the psi on the compressor. Okay. There you go, that's pretty much it. Obviously I've got to do the other sides, but the technique is the same. You'll notice I went over it 3 or 4 times there, and the first twice I just kind of kept it at the same angle, and then the third time I kind of angled it from the other direction. This is just so you're getting an even paint finish. If you just go from the one side all the time, you'll have shiny bits of rail on the right hand side, obviously because the angle the spray is coming in at. And the final one, I tried to go more vertical just to get right down onto the chairs that are holding the rails in place. This is just so that there's no silver, nickel, metal showing through the paint. So I'll basically leave that now to dry. I'll obviously continue with the rest of it, and then I'll show you the next stage, which is just toning down the ballast and the tops of the sleepers. You'll see here that I've weathered the side of the rails with the sleeper grime. But you'll notice on the left hand side there, it's a bit brownier in between and round about the edges of the sleepers. That's what I'm going to show you now, just to kind of feather it in, dull the ballast down in amongst the tracks and the sleepers, and make it look a bit more realistic, okay, and heavily used. So I'll take you through that now. Now what you've got to do is you've got to have the same mix of thinner to enamel, but you've just got to very steady hand and almost lightly coat it on the outside of the sleepers first. So I've got this section to do here. What I'm going to show you do now is to blend in the ballast with the tops of the sleepers using again the same sleeper grime. This time I'm going to hold the airbrush slightly higher above the track so it kind of rains and mists down on top of the area between the two rails. So we don't want to go too close, we don't want a kind of a thin strip, we want more of a kind of gradual covering of the sleepers and the ballast, okay? What I've done might not look much, but if you look at the bottom left hand portion of track, that's not been treated in between the sleepers yet, as opposed to the bottom right and the track along the top, which has been weathered. You're not looking to make a kind of mudslide finish on it yet. You can add more later if you wish, but I'm going to tone down the brown with some darker colours to replicate, oil and grime. So, don't be tempted to overdo it at this stage. You can always add more. Okay, what I'm going to do to finish off the weathering of the track is add a very, very quick and light dusting of the rail match roof dirt enamel down the middle of the tracks between the rails, okay? What I tend to do is if I do a section at a time, I'll kind of mask off and I'll get my misting correct before I move it onto the track. So I'll kind of be able to gauge how much is going down, then I'll move it on. And obviously you can see by the masking, I do that quite often. And I tend to work in sections at a time. Maybe I go from rail joiner to rail joiner just so I can keep track of my weathering. I tend to work in sections anyway. Right, okay, let's have a wee dusting of this roof dirt. Now, believe it or not, I actually have airbrushed that, but it's just basically what it's doing is it's taking the brown tinge off the top of the sleepers, but leaving obviously the browny kind of sleeper grime elsewhere. It's just to replicate grime, a wee bit of oil, that kind of stuff that obviously comes from the bottom of the locos and the rolling stock. If I'm going to do oil spills, which I'll show you in the next stage, obviously I'm going to be more heavy handed with the staining of the dark colour. Okay. One thing about using an airbrush is cleaning it. After every session you've got to clean the airbrush and flush it out, and to do that I use airbrush cleaner. That's Badger stuff. It's a spray aerosol. You'll notice mine looks almost pristine because I give it a good clean. If, for example, if I've got a 4-day job, 5-day job going like with the weathering of the track, I'll give it a mild clean if you like, but at the end of the job I'll give it a deep clean. I'll strip it down and clean all the parts individually before reassembling it. So just to get all the paint out and any blockages that might occur in future, I've got an airbrush cleaning pot here, and you just pop that in there and you can flush your cleaner etc through the airbrush, and it kind of holds all the paint in here and lets some of the fumes out there. Again, I do this in a reasonably well ventilated area and still wear your mask. The airbrush will not perform for you the next time if you've not cleaned it from the previous job. You're just storing up problems to yourself. So take your time, look after your equipment. It's not cheap after all, and it will reward you next time and next time and next time when you need it. The last piece of weathering I do to my tracks is to add some oil leaking and dark grime. And what I use for that on this particular section I'm going to talk about is Precision Paints P978 Oil Leakings, and it's a matte finish. Okay. Now, I've put it on this end of the passing loop for two reasons. One, I've got the TMD just up the way there, and then some trains locos might be shunted into here and stabled in there for a while to make room for the TMD, or wait to go down to the station, etc. So they'll be sitting there and they'll be dripping grease and dripping oil. I've also got a DMU that I use in the upper section, and it might have to come into the passing loop on a daily basis to allow the HST to go through on the express. So it's going to be sitting here for a period of time, again dripping oil and grease and grime. So I've kind of heavily weathered it for the length of a 3-car DMU and maybe 3 or 4 locos that could be stationed and stabled there. Okay, that's been, obviously you can see the difference between that and the upper main where it's going through at high speed. There's less chance for it to drop oil and whatnot in great quantities. I've just obviously gone over that with the roof dirt just to dull it down a little bit. Okay, if you've got a track that's not getting used at all, you might want to really go dark with the rusting. If I take you across to one of my tracks I did last year, this siding here is not getting used at all, and it'll be overgrown eventually with weeds and some static grass. It's really been darkened down with the grime and the dark rust, which is a rail match paint. If you want to do a new track that's just been laid, you'd put maybe a lighter rust on the track along with some grime, to show that, you know, obviously it's been laid more recently. The rails are newer. Okay, if you want a brand new track, you've basically no weathering at all. But how often do you see that? You might want a section of brand new track, right enough, with some civil engineers round about it and a track worker just, you know, checking it all out before it's open to traffic. But this particular passing loop I wanted really grimy, and these upper main lines I wanted, you know, yes, grimy, sleeper grime, but not too much in the way of oil. The final thing to do after all the paint's dry, take a Pico track rubber or equivalent and just basically rub the paint off the tops of the rails, and then I'd give it a quick hoover. Just, you know, get your attachments from your Dyson or whatever, just to take off any paint that you've obviously rubbed off the top of the tracks and the top of the rails.